Hi class, in today's lesson I'm going to be teaching you the key to writing in expressive ways. What do I mean when I say expressive? When I say expressive, what I really want to see when I say I want this, when I'm reading something and I say I wish this was more expressive, what I'm trying to say is I wish I could see more from this character, or I wish I could see more from this scene. Your character does not have to be an expressive character for you to write them in an expressive way. If they're introverted, let's say, write them introverted very, very well. You need to demonstrate introversion. I think that's right. I think that's how you say that. You need to demonstrate that behavior really well. Think of all the ways you can demonstrate a person who's introverted. And then do that. That's what I mean when I say expressive. It doesn't mean that your characters have to be extroverts or that your writing has to be super detailed like Ernest Hemingway, or like the gentleman who wrote, I think it's called Troll Hunters, something like that. That book is super detailed. I don't mean that. I just mean show whatever is happening really well, and obviously use the right words, right? As a writer, you need to know how to manipulate words, and so you also want to write it in a way that is, and that's different. That would be a different lesson, but that's more of, I suppose that would be called rhetoric, right? The way that you express, right? I think that's it. I know rhetoric has to do with logic and things like that, but I also imagine rhetoric in writing is the way that you would express something. It's the way you write. And that would be a different lesson. So let's get to it. What is the key to writing in expressive ways? Critical thinking. I'm going to read the definition here for you. Critical thinking is a form of introspection. It is when we ask ourselves questions about our thoughts. It is also considered a form of reflecting on our thoughts. Now, this definition I wrote, and I wrote it specifically for writing, because critical thinking is not only when we ask ourselves questions about our thoughts. Critical thinking can also be asking an open-ended question about somebody else's thoughts to gain more understanding. But for this lesson, and what I'm trying to teach you, and what I really want you to do, and what I think would help you write in a more expressive way, is by asking yourself questions about your thoughts and reflecting on your thoughts about whatever you're writing. So, what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. It's been a minute, but a couple months ago, I read a play called Doubt, or Doubts. And the play, it was a very short play, consisted of 3 characters. There was a young, it took place in in a church, and so there was a young nun, and there was a more mature nun, and then there was a priest. And the young nun was, described as and really behaved as someone who was impressionable, very impressionable. And the mature nun was someone who had a lot of doubts. And she had a lot of doubts about this new priest who obviously worked in the church. And after I finished reading that play, it really provoked a lot of thought for me. And I thought about how doubts or how doubting shapes so many things, right? That's doubt is a behavior, although it's a private behavior. It can be demonstrated in an outward way, right? Maybe we don't do something because we doubt we can do it. And I thought about what I thought about doubts and what basically my notion and my schema and my conception of doubt and the way doubt works in the world according to me, right? The way doubt affects people and society according to me. In the play, I'm sorry I don't remember who wrote that. In the play, the writer obviously thought a lot about doubts, right? Thought a lot about this behavior of doubt, and essentially made a manifestation of it through story, right? He manifested his thoughts about doubt by creating a play about doubt. And that story is a demonstration of what he thinks about doubt and the way doubt works in the mind of someone who is impressionable, in the mind of someone who has lived a long time, and how it affects how our doubts affect other people when we doubt out loud, when we express our doubt, and how that influences the behavior of other people. And that is what the writer showed there. And he showed his notion and his conception and his schema of doubt and the way it works in the world and in people and society and certain individuals, because we can all respond to it in different ways. So when I say critical thinking is a form of introspection, when we ask ourselves questions about our thoughts, really specifically about what do I think about doubt? How do I think doubt works in the world? How do I think doubt influences me and my behavior? How do I think my doubt can influence the people around me? How do they respond to the way that I doubt? And that's really what I mean by thinking critically about our thoughts. And obviously when you're writing always has to be specific. So you would be thinking critically about one specific thing and it would be the specific thing you're trying to write about. Your story, and let's move on here. Your story can't simply be about a series of events. That would make it very superficial. Characters are in your story, and characters are the ones who drive the plot. Actually, in my other lessons, I've said that it kind of happens, I think the word would be in tandem, where the things that happen in the plot are going to influence character decisions, right? The decisions characters make, and it's kind of happening back and forth. So this might happen in your story and the character is going to respond this way, and then because your character responds this way, then this is going to happen in the story. So it has to happen in tandem, and that means that whatever your character thinks, right, you have to know what's important to your character. And let's look at this slide here. You have to be able to relate to whatever you're writing. Meaning, you have to write characters that you can relate to, even if they're an antagonist, right? Let's think about Voldemort. Voldemort wanted to live forever. Can't we relate to that? Right? If we're thinking from a different worldview, wouldn't you want to live forever in a place that was perfect, that was paradise? If the earth was paradise, right? Because I would imagine not everybody wants to live forever in a war-torn sort of world that we live in. But if we could live forever in paradise, wouldn't we want to live forever? And that's Voldemort, right? Voldemort was super evil. And we can relate to that. People can relate to that. And even Thanos, right? Thanos, what did he think? He thought, I don't really know what he thought. Something about how he wanted to basically restore the world in the way he thought it should be. So he was going to wipe out, I don't know how many people. And then that's what I think. He was going to wipe out whatever number of people so that he can make the world the way that he wanted it to. I think that's what Thanos wanted. And can't we relate to that? Like, he wanted the world to be a better place, I suppose. And he wanted it to be a better place. And he thought that he was like God and can make it that way, obviously. But we can relate to the idea that he wanted the world to be better. And these are antagonists. These are people we don't like in the story. We're not rooting for these people, but we can understand where they're coming from. They're just not responding to those feelings in inappropriate ways. And that's what makes them an antagonist, right? So even if you're whatever you're writing, all your characters, you have to be able to relate to them. You can't come up with a character and make them a person that you don't even understand, right? And if you can't relate to what you're writing, probably a lot of other people can't either. I'm going to continue reading what I wrote here. Always write in a way that is relatable to you. Use your imagination to express what you know is true, or whatever you believe, or whatever you feel or have felt in the past. Isn't it true that we want to live in a better world? That is true, right? I would imagine all of us want to live in a better world. And is that not what Thanos wanted. And there are so many ways that you can write a story about a character who wants to live in a better world. And you can make the character who has that desire. That's what's so intriguing about Thanos, where usually a character who wants to live in a better world normally would be the hero. But in the Avengers, it was the antagonist. And they used that thought that everybody wants. Everybody wants to live in a better world. They used that idea and they took that idea and they used their imagination to express it in the form of Thanos. And in that whole story, that whole Avengers series. So that's taking what you know and then combining it with an imagination, right? And that also adds a lot of substance to your story. Finally, and there's more slides, but for this slide, you have to write about things that are meaningful to you. If you don't care about living in a better world, and I'm not judging you, if you don't care about that, then don't write about that. If that's not something that's important to you, then don't write about it. Your story has to represent something to you in a very vulnerable way. You have to write about an idea that is meaningful to you, something you care about a lot. And you can say, I want to write about love. Love is something that's very meaningful to me. But that's not specific enough, right? What do you mean when you say, I want to write about love? This is what I mean by you have to think critically. When you think critically, you can get down to the specifics. What is it about love that you love so much? Why is it meaningful to you? And what specifically about love are you talking about? Because you can love a lot of things, and you can love in a lot of ways. There are stories that I'm thinking about Lady Bird right now. I believe it was Greta. I'm sorry, I can't remember her last name. Maybe Greta Gerwig, that was her name. The writer of that story, Lady Bird. She also wrote the Barbie movie, or she directed the Barbie movie. And I hope that's her name, Greta Gerwig. I imagine when she was writing Lady Bird, she probably thought about the relationship she had with her mom. Probably what she loved about her mom. And in that story, maybe more so the struggle she had with her mom when she was a teenager. Or simply the struggles that teenage girls have with their mom. And that's very specific. Like, this is a teenage girl who clearly loves her mom, right? Because when we don't love someone, if you've seen Lady Bird, when we don't love someone, we're not going to argue with them. We're not going to really waste our time with them. So definitely the character in that story, and I can't remember her name, but the teenager in that story definitely loved her mom, and they had many differences. And I don't want to ruin the end for you, but that's obviously, I'm sure the relationship she has with her mom, and for a lot of us, the relationship we have with our mom is something that's very meaningful to us. And specifically, she wrote about a girl who was just about to graduate and leave, and the challenges that young girl faced as she was nearing graduation and what that meant. So that's a little bit more specific, and definitely her mom played a big role in that. I would say it's more of a coming of age story about a young girl who's about to graduate, but the relationship with her mom took a lot of precedence, I suppose, in that story. And we see that. And I'm sure that that was something that was very meaningful to Greta, who wrote that story. I hope that makes sense. Let's keep going. Okay, here's another example for you. Identity theft. And this is a much simpler example for you, because when you try to explain coming of age stories and love, that's such a big thing. But here we go. Identity theft. Maybe you'll understand a little bit better with this example. I think you will. So Identity Theft is a comedy. It's actually a really funny movie. I like it anyway. It's really funny in a really silly and dramatic way. So we have here Dawn Budgie, who is the main character, schemes her way through life by stealing people's identity. That's basically who she is. And that's kind of what happens in the story. She steals a certain person, she steals a man's identity, and the man has to find her, chase her down, so that his life doesn't shred into ruins, right? So throughout the movie, the viewer learns that Dawn has faced profound rejection in her life and continues to experience rejection throughout the movie. She steals from others because she's angry that no one in her life has ever accepted her. What do you think whoever created that character, maybe whoever created the character is not the writer of the movie, what do you think the creator of that character has experienced in their life, or understands at least? Some people can't write things they haven't experienced, and some people can simply write things that they understand. And so let's look at this last paragraph here. The creator of the character, that is Dawn Budgie, likely experienced rejection in a way that deeply affected them, or at least has observed how rejection deeply affects human beings. And I wrote here, it's not a stretch to believe that the creator of Dawn Budgie has experienced rejection in a profound way, because writers are rejected all the time, right? Writers get more rejection letters, usually anyway, than they do contracts for novels and movies and things like that. So they took this feeling of rejection and and I'm laughing because it's such a funny movie. They took this feeling of rejection, something that they've probably felt in their life. I think everybody experiences that in their life. They took that feeling of rejection and they put it into this character, and they exaggerated the response to rejection in the character that is Dawn Budgie. And although Dawn is the person who is stealing and the person who's giving, I don't remember the other character's name. I think the actor's name is Jason. It's not Jason Bateman. I don't know. The guy she steals from, although she's stealing from this guy, we feel for her, and the viewer can feel for her and can relate to her because of what we see her experience. And it doesn't have to be a sappy movie. This is a really funny movie. But it has moments like that where we can relate to the character. And that feeling of rejection is really what drove the whole plot, right? I'm going to create a character who has experienced so much rejection, right? Who's just been rejected a lot in their life. And that's probably where they probably worked from there. And they used their imagination to demonstrate this individual's response to rejection in a really funny way. That's taking what we know and combining it with our imagination. How can we take what we know and what we know is true, what we believe, our values, and our thoughts, whatever. How can we take what we know is true and show it in a really imaginative way? That's writing in an expressive way. When we take what we know and we show it in a different way, not in a literal way, because a lot of writers will take what they know and show it in a very literal way. But for novels, and if you're writing story, that's the complete opposite of literal. And even, I would say, in a lot of songs, not every song, but even in a lot of songs, we also see expression in a creative way. They use, a lot of songs use literary devices to say certain things. So that's the example, and I think this is more clear than the ladybird one. Now, I want you to consider, right, and this is sort of what I was just alluding to right now, and I'm going to read this for you. You don't have to write about an event that happened to you exactly as it happened to you. You can simply think about how you felt in that moment, take that feeling, and create a character who feels the same way, but in a dramatic sense, where they respond very dramatically to the feeling. Why? Because stories, songs, everything that is written down is dramatic. It's an exaggeration of a feeling. Don't you ever, and perhaps you've seen this in life, where don't you ever wish life was like the movies? I think a lot of us wish that way. But it's not. Life is not like the movies. They say art is an imitation of life, and it is, but it's in a very exaggerated way. Characters, and that's why it's called drama, right? Because it's dramatic. Its characters are essentially a representation of 2 or 3 things, and that's it. And you can think, no, these characters are really dynamic. But actually, you can look at a character and really, they kind of represent just 2 or 3 things. And they represent 2 or 3 things in a really dynamic way. And that's why we say, oh, this character is such a dynamic character. But they're only dynamic in the way that they are, in the way that they express what they represent. And I guess I'll give you an example here of a character. I want to use Harry Potter, although I haven't seen Harry Potter in quite some time. And I read the first book, which was very good. I'm sorry, I really loved Harry Potter as a kid. And I do love the movies. I didn't finish watching the movies, but when I think of Harry Potter was at times, he was very cheeky, right? He was very cheeky, tongue-in-cheek, whatever, but mostly, and that added some humor to his character, but mostly Harry was this representation of someone who overcame, right? So he was a representation of courage and a representation of, I would really simply say, courage, right? Harry Potter is a representation of courage. He was courageous in every single book, every movie, even though I didn't read all the books, every book, every movie. And really also dedicated, right? Courageous and dedicated to everything that is good, right? He always wanted to sort of do the right thing and, abolish Voldemort, right? He just went for it. And I guess he had to, because he had to fight for his life. Voldemort was coming after him. And so it was personal, right? He took it personally, obviously, because it was. And so but he didn't just do it for himself. It was for the sake of, Voldemort had a thing for Harry, because he wanted to be immortal. But obviously Harry didn't only do it to save his life, right? He didn't only go on this journey of saving Hogwarts and that whole magical world so that he can continue living. He did it for the sake of others too, right? So he was a very courageous character. I would say that more than anything. And he's also a character who represents life. And that's what I would say. And so we see these two dynamic things, life and courage, in Harry Potter. And J.K. Rowling, who to me, the author I compare her to all the time is C.S. Lewis. And I think when I read anything J.K. Rowling, I don't know, maybe this isn't true. Maybe a more savant, reader, whatever, can read C.S. Lewis and J.K. Rowling and be like, no, they write completely differently. But every time I read something written by J.K. Rowling, I just think of C.S. Lewis and that series of Narnia, and I feel like it's written so similarly. They I don't know, I think their style is very similar. And so J.K. Rowling, I think everything she writes is, I can't say enough really about J.K. Rowling, and not just for Harry Potter, but really everything she writes. And she takes this young man who represents life and courage and shows those two things in a very expressive way through the trials they go to and the way that they respond to those trials, and basically the way they behave, the way that they demonstrate how their life, right? So expression is essentially the way that your characters demonstrate whatever they're supposed to represent throughout the story. In summary, you need to think critically. Really think about what you think is true. Is it really, right? What are your values? Question, right? Think about how you feel. You can't write a story or a song without thinking about your feelings. You can't write a story or a song absent from your feelings. You can't. So you need to know how you feel and really understand your feelings and not just say, I feel happy. Well, why? What specifically is making you feel happy? And just think about it for a good while. You can't just say happy, right? Reflect on important moments in your life. Harry Potter, I'll go back to it. I believe J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter after her mother died. And that story is essentially a story about life and death, right? Where Harry represents life, and although Voldemort wants to live forever, he wants to do it by killing, right? So it's life and death, and we also see, I think a lot of people know that J.K. Rowling experienced a lot of heartache when her mom passed away. I think that was the manifestation of those Dementors, right, that we see in Prisoner of Azkaban. I believe that's where they show up. She said that was sort of a manifestation of this feeling of depression, right? And J.K. Rowling went through a lot of things in her life, right? If you don't know her life story, you can go ahead and read about it. It's pretty well documented, and it's a story about life and death. And I'm sure she thought a lot about her life as she was creating this story, Harry Potter. And we can see, if we know about J.K. Rowling, we can see a lot of how the things that happened in her life influenced the creation of that story. Ask yourself questions like, what would such have been like if such didn't happen, right? Ask thought-provoking questions. Make your story relatable, right? And the way you can do that is just by putting yourself in it. And it doesn't have to be literally you. It can just be one part of you or two parts of you in a really exaggerated way. You don't have to write about the exact things you've experienced, but you can write about your feelings, infuse those in a character in a dramatic way, and use your imagination to tell a story that demonstrates feeling and the cause and effect of certain feelings, because that's what story is. It's all cause and effect. This happened, so they do this, and then they did this, so then that happens. So that would conclude this lesson, and I hope I really got into it. I hope this helps your writing, and of course, if you have any questions, you can leave them down below in the comments section, and I will always get back to you, right? At least as I'm developing this channel, I can get back to you, and I do hope that I hope obviously I can always get back to everybody. But of course, as you'll see at the end of this video, I do offer tutoring lessons, and I can always help you that way, and you're gonna see that scene, that cut scene now. Thank you so much for being part of this lesson, and I'll see you next class. Hi scholars, it's Barbie, your teacher assistant. If you like this video but feel like you need a little bit more help, you can always email me at ytaest23@gmail.com for a private tutoring lesson. My rates are very flexible. I make it work to work with you. Thank you so much for being part of this class, and don't forget to subscribe.